Okay, you guys, I love my giraffe retractable hose reel. And by the way, this is not a sponsored post, but I talked about it so frequently last year, and I'll talk about it a little bit again in the separate epilogue that we do about products. But I got this giraffe retractable hose reel last year. I actually bought 3 of them. All of my hoses now are connected to them. And Stuart, will you validate that it makes it so much easier?
So much easier.
Yeah, so much easier. Okay, as long as we're talking about Stuart, so many of you loved the way he chimed in a little bit more and requested that that he mic up because you couldn't hear some of his snide comments. So he has a mic on today in case he decides to be verbose and make commentary on what we're talking about. And let's see, there was one other thing. Okay, so I'm going to start out with my question of the day because yesterday was very, very exciting for me. It was my book release date, and no matter where you ordered your book, whether it was from a pre-order on Amazon or Talk Shop Live, it's now on QVC. Some of you may have bought one already from an independent bookstore, or you may have bought one from me at a book signing. But at any rate, thank you, thank you, thank you. Do you have a copy? I guess that is my first question. Have you gotten a copy? And secondly, a big ask, if you've gotten it and if it lives up to your expectations and if you find it valuable. I know the photographs are beautiful because Stuart took most of them. If you enjoy the eye candy of it and if you find it valuable, then if you would consider going to Amazon and giving me a very honest, but giving me a review, I would appreciate it. So there's my question of the day, my big ask. Do you have my book? And would you please go on Amazon.com and write a review? To do that, just click on the reviews, scroll down, and it will say write a review. And then you can just submit it that way. It's very easy. A couple of other housekeeping things. Some of you asked if we would produce a short video on how to find the description, how to find the links and all of that, and Stuart is working on that, and we will dedicate that to the person who suggested it. We have intended to do it for a long time, and sometimes it takes a little nudge from you guys as followers to get us to do something. So today, let me talk about what I'm going to be doing in the garden. As you will probably note, it is still tremendously windy. It's always windy in spring, but we just haven't had a break this year. It's cool today. Yesterday it was very hot. Well, what was 86? Did it get up to 86 yesterday? So they were hot, drying winds, the worst kind of conditions for tulips for your spring show in general. So it's always aggravating when that happens. But what are you going to do? We've just got to live where we are and do the best we can. So today, what I want to talk about is what I'm calling a Working Wednesday walkabout. And that is one of the quotes or the remarks that I make in the book is I consider myself the attending physician of my own garden, and I make my morning rounds visiting all of my patients. And this is the type of thing that I do in my morning rounds. And what is required for this are some kind of snips, typically a weeding basket and a pair of gloves, though sometimes it might just be my snips. But this morning I'm going to do several things. I'm going to follow up on our last video about the porch refresh that really seemed to resonate with you guys. I hope it did, and I'm going to expound on that a little bit more. One of the things that I talked about was thinking about, I guess we'll call it succession planting, and that is what comes next. So spring is very fleeting here in Oklahoma. It might be fleeting where you are. And if it is, then we need to think about what is going to come into bloom next to replace the spring show. And we're equally as concerned about that because we want to get those secondary bloomers in place and established before the heat hits. because in Oklahoma there are only two seasons. There's before the heat and there's after the heat. So what I'm going to do is add to this beautiful blue plumbago. Stuart, you will recall that I tucked these in the other day, and I love the way they look with the blue pansies. But now I'm going to expand on this a little bit more because I got something very exciting. I'll just briefly mention it to you, and then we'll talk about it more later. But look at these, you guys. So these are starts. They're perfect for plopping and placing and planting, something that I talked about before. And I have some little mini petunias here, and I've got some coleus that are both in my color palette for my porch this year. But these, you guys, are part of my Linda Vater Signature Garden Collection line that will be available hopefully on QVC. Now, I told you that I was going to be on tomorrow. As it turns out, because of supply issues, that's going to be delayed. At this point, it will be April 28th. But they have started sending me samples, and I love the way these are packaged, you guys. And the nice thing about them is they're not only protected like this, but they stayed moist in transit. And then I can use these plastic trays for other kinds of things. And in fact, I've already used one in a drawer where they're holding batteries, different kinds of batteries in a drawer, but they could also hold other things. They could hold toiletries, they could hold office supplies. But let me show you what I'm going to do with these little darlings right now.
It's the first time I'm seeing them.
The first time, yeah. I just got them yesterday, Stuart.
That's
I'll show you
cool.
I'll show you some more in the back. Yes, Stuart is pleased. But okay, aren't they cute? Perfect for plopping and placing, and they're also perfect for inserting into planters that are already established, and you are just going to be switching out the annual color. So this would be the perfect example of that. But these I'm going to plant in the window box, and this is a perfect example of something that I would do in a Wednesday working walkabout. And as I do this, Stuart, excuse me, Mr. Easter Bunny, are you going to help me plant some things today? I know you're thinking that my ensemble isn't very Easterish, but what can I say? Okay, so this is the first thing I'm going to do. This is very complicated. You just take your gloves and you make a little hole. A little depression into the dirt. These are not, look at these guys. They are not pot bound or root bound at all. And I'm just going to plop him in there. And then when these pansies fade, this will already get a great start. Again, before the heat hits, and even now while they're getting established, they are part of my color palette, which I just love. So I'm going to tuck one in the back. I guess, Stuart, I kind of got in the way of that.
Sure.
I'm going to tuck one, maybe I'm going to kind of tuck one in here. And the nice thing is you just kind of nudge the other plant out of the way. These are very moist, you guys. Can you see that? I watered them again. I opened the box as soon as I got it, watered them again. These come from Roberta's. And I could not be more pleased. I squealed with excitement, didn't I, Stuart?
You did.
When I called and told you that they had arrived. So I'm going to put one in over here. Now, you talk about ease of planting. This is the perfect example of what I discussed the other day. That is plopping, placing, and planting. Now I'm going to do, let's see, I need one more on the other side. So for right now, I think I'm going to steal this one. I'm going to have to order more of these, you guys. So for right now, I'm going to put this one over here. So if you put it in the wrong place, no problem. It can easily be moved. And then I've got more of these in the back. These little, they look like just miniature petunias. And I'm going to stick that in there. And by the way, you guys, every plant that I picked for my collection these are tough. They can really handle the heat. Now this one I want to eventually kind of cascade over the side, so I'm going to plant this one right here. So I just love that. It's like puzzle pieces, and I don't have to be real systematic and I guess I don't have to worry too much about where I install them, where I insert them, because the impact I want to get is just profusion of yellow, green, and purple or lavender. So I don't really have to be careful if I am being too symmetrical or anything like that in my planting. And I will add to this a little bit later. I am going to take this plastic and I am going to save it, but you do see that it is made from 100% recycled products. Please recycle again. And before I recycle it though, I'm going to use it in my house. So Stuart,
which is recycling.
Which is recycling. So I love that, and I love how practical it is. And by the way, I won't go into it too much, but you can see these little letters in here. These are guides that kind of are planting guides if you want to formulate like a hanging basket or something. So that is the first job on my working walkabout. Now you can see here that some of these guys are really starting to fade. But I'm not going to pull them out quite yet because they still have color enough to have merit. But I am going to do this every day I walk through. Actually, I do this several times a day when I am wool gathering, and I just want to walk around to the front yard and see how pretty it looks. That guy needs to come out of there. And I deadhead my pansies. Now this is really important if you want the show to continue. And sometimes if they get leggy and it looks like we're going to have a cool stretch coming in, I might even, can you see this, Stuart? See how this one is kind of leggy? I might even just pinch that back completely, and it might send out another shoot. But it not only makes the whole container look more presentable, but it also will force more blooms. And I will do that up here also. And I do this sometimes just several times a day to keep the show looking fresh. And it's also important to do this because we've had so much wind that these blooms just don't look as presentable. Look at how gorgeous that is, Stuart. Isn't that beautiful?
Yep.
Stuart's not very talkative today. But I just love the way it looks, and I want it to stay looking fresh, so I'm gonna do that periodically. Okay, so now let's go back out into the garden. The bacopa is looking great. This is a fun little thing that I did yesterday, and I planted this urn. I went to an herb festival and I got, this is some Mexican mint that I put in the center, and then I had some rose-colored nasturtiums, and I soaked the seeds and then I planted those all around the perimeter, and I covered it with this cloche because I don't want the squirrels digging in it. Now, here is another example. Let me get my weeding basket, because this is another example of what I would do on my Working Wednesday walkabout, okay? So here, there's a couple of different things I could do. This yesterday, Stuart, remember you took a picture of it, and it was absolutely beautiful, and now it is just sad because all of those blooms blew away, which is why we hate this kind of wind during this season. So I can, right here, let me show you, and hopefully I can do it without it disturbing this nasturtium, because this is another example of succession planting. So this guy is finished. So I am going to ever so gently pull this guy out, then tuck that nasturtium back in. The nasturtium will then have more room to grow and have more light and start filling out this planter now that these bulbs are done. So I can pull out those that are spent, and I can compost those. See, there's another little nasturtium right there.
Mm-hmm.
These are kind of a, it's what?
Sneaky.
Sneaky, yeah, it's kind of sneaky. It's hiding in there. Okay, this one I think is done, so I'm gonna pull this one out, give it a tug, and you can see how there'll be more room. Now, let's pretend that these guys are just, they haven't been watered and they're just really tightly compacted in here. And you want to give these guys room, but you're afraid that by pulling out the tulip, you're going to disturb the nasturtium. And by the way, nasturtiums do not necessarily like to have their roots disturbed. That's why it's sometimes difficult to maybe transplant them or move them around too much. So in that case, then you just take your snips. Come in here, see how these are starting, this guy's crowding it. I'm gonna take my snips, and I'm not gonna pull these guys out, because that way I will in no way disturb the root ball of that nasturtium, but it will get a lot more light, a lot more airflow, and it will start growing more and filling out this pot. See, here's another one over here, Stuart.
Sneaky.
So as I said, I could pull these out, but to be careful, I am just going to snip back these guys. And then these guys will start to thicken up and get a lot bushier and grow a lot more. Then if I, whoa, about blew away, Stuart.
Mm-hmm.
Then if I so chose, I could just take some of those little planting pellets, that's a fun name, and I could just tuck those in here. And then I would have, in short order, I would have a full container again, because I have already thought ahead and I have planted some nasturtiums in here to take the place of these blooms that are about done. So that's the example of another thing that I would do on a Wednesday walking workabout, or workabout Wednesday walkabout. That is a mouthful. Okay, so as I come through, oops, Stuart, I'm sorry, I need to get my basket. See, as soon as I took my sweater off, it got cold again.
It did. It
really did. Stuart has a jacket on, by the way. Okay.
Which was hot for a minute. Now it feels good.
Yeah. Okay, so here I'm deadheading. This is another kind of thing that I do. If any leaves are yellowing, I'll go ahead and take those off. And I can also assess what type of things need watering while I'm doing this.
That's a good idea.
And I can also check to see if there's like any budworms or anything like that. It's a little bit early in the season for budworms to be a problem. But then as I go along, and you always start in one designated area, and if you don't want to pinch because you just got a manicure, then you've got your handy little snips with you, and you can use those to snip off any spent bloom. And the nice thing is, if you use your snips, you guys, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to necessarily pick those up, because they will just decompose in place and be just fine, won't they, Stuart?
Yes, they will.
They will be just fine. Okay. So then as I'm walking around, I will just methodically deadhead, cut off any brown stuff. And then wherever I stop, if I stop and I go in and I want to finish what I'm doing a little bit later, that's just where I leave my basket, is right there where I have gotten to in my circumnavigation of the garden to do deadheading. Now another thing I'm going to start doing is, to the extent I can, I'm going to pull out those tulips that are finished. Sometimes they come out cleanly and sometimes they snap off. I prefer them to come out cleanly because I don't necessarily want this kind of thing to happen. So you can see here, if you look back in here, that these were blooms where I probably just snapped off and I didn't get the entire bulb when I pulled it, and then it just kind of puts out some of this not very interesting, it's not really doing anything foliage that just looks kind of like a weed in the landscape. So that's typically why I try to pull them out in their entirety as I go through the garden. There's something over here I wanted to show you. What was it, Stuart?
Not sure.
I'm always, what were you going to say?
I said not sure.
Not sure, because I'm
Sometimes
just,
I know.
yeah, I tend to be kind of rabid this time of year. I like this kind of thing. Here is another tip for you guys. I've got this Poa annua that comes up everywhere. This is that it's also commonly called kind of ryegrass around here. I do want to get that as best I can by the root because I don't want it coming back. And then someone, got a little bit of chickweed in here, someone very astutely noticed that sometimes when I am weeding, I'll weed and then I just kind of plop it there on the stepping stone. And she said, well, can't the weed seeds, once they dry, then just go right back into the soil? And yes, they can. So if I don't have, a lot of times I'm doing what I think of as accidental weeding. I don't really intend to go out and weed, and I don't always have my basket for the weeds handy. So what I'll do is put them in a little pile, and then later I will go back and try to pick up those weeds. Okay, Stuart, which of these things is not like the other in this area right here? Let's play this game as I pull these weeds over here.
It's taking away one of my options.
Okay.
Is that guy? It is
That guy. And you know what that is?
I mean, I wouldn't guess right.
You wouldn't guess right. Okay, that is.
Looks like some sort of melons I grew, really.
Okay, that's perfect because it's a gourd. It's actually a pumpkin seed.
Well, then yeah, I should have guessed.
Yeah, you should have guessed. So you were very close.
It's a melon of sorts.
Yeah, it's a melon of sorts, and I could pull that out, but typically I leave it there in case I have a little kid visitor who would just be absolutely delighted by that. And by the way, you guys, this week, I think, was it yesterday, Stuart? Or I think it was yesterday. I think this person gets the award for coming farthest to see my garden because they came all the way from Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
And she came by and stopped by to see the garden. And so we had a nice visit. So I've got that. And I'm trying, by the way, you guys, one of my resolutions was to try to place, not plop. Do you remember that, Stuart?
I do.
So that I remember what I did with my garden tools. Something else that I am noticing is that a lot of the ground covers, the Vinca minor, they're starting to get a little bit too rambunctious. And I'm not too worried about that because some of this lamium or bishop's weed is getting a little too rambunctious. Because what I will do, this is again thinking about the future and succession
right
plantings. That stuff right there, and it looks, Stuart, it blooms like this. And this is one of those plants that can definitely be overly aggressive. But it is, in my garden anyway, not necessarily in yours, but in my garden it's relatively easy to pull out. And I use it in flower arrangements and things. But the other reason that I don't worry about it too much is because after the tulips are finished, after the phlox is no longer in bloom, here's a great tip, you guys, then I come back, either I or somebody who's helping me in the yard will come back with a weed eater, and they will very neatly just weed eat all of the ground cover to get it low again, make its coverage tighter and bushier, and also take off the faded seed heads. Okay, here we have a perfect dandelion.
With all this wind.
With all this wind, yeah. Okay, and there it goes.
It's pretty Pretty
I should
dead on.
probably, another tip that I have not done is I should probably have a plastic bag in here, because then I could insert this into the plastic bag and these little weed seeds wouldn't go absolutely everywhere. But for right now, I'll just try to pack it and hide it down in there. So this is something rather thrilling, you guys. I told you that Encore azaleas is now they're just almost a bulletproof plant. These had set bud, and a lot of the initial buds got blasted out because it had been very, very warm, and then the temperatures went down to like, I think it was like 18. At least not like minus 18 like last year, but around 18. And what it did was it burned lots of foliage, and the foliage browned. But look here, Stuart, there's buds. Look here. The buds are still intact, and they didn't freeze out, and now all of these Encore azaleas are starting to bloom, and they're starting to put out all of this fresh new growth. So you can see some here, you can see some over there. These are all just starting to bloom. So this will make me happy, because once the tulips are finished, these will come into bloom. Look at this, Stuart. Is that not gorgeous? Just in bud form. I think it's beautiful. And then there are other colors in other areas, but they're all in that pink-white kind of cerise pink tonal range. So this whole area will come into bloom pretty soon. Here's something I don't think I've showed you before. These are some Spanish bluebells. I got these from Color Blends years ago. These do come back. Here's some these are so dear. Very, very sweet. And these are bluebell. Well, this one is actually a white bell. Here's a bluebell. And these do come back. There's a few, you can see some kind of scattered over in there. They're blooming a little bit later this year than they normally do. You can see a few more Encore azaleas back in there. There's also some right in here, Stuart. Get out of the way. And this is another thing I can do while I'm down here. But there's some more. And I've got some of those in the back too. Again, in some places, people have told me that those can be overly aggressive and kind of take over sections of their landscape. Here, not a problem. They have been there for years, and I could always dig them up easily if there was something of an issue. Okay, last year, this was one of those things that I'm embarrassed to say, but I had these Eugenia topiaries, and I have had them for years. These are like 5 or 6 years old now. They came out of the greenhouse a couple of weeks ago, and I've got them in these lightweight pots so that they can easily be transported in and out of the greenhouse. And I'm getting ready to actually top dress these with some composted manure. But they tend to be top heavy because of the heavy-headed lollipop section on them, and they tend to blow over quite frequently. So what last year I made a slight indentation into the soil. This year I just dug a big hole, and that should do a couple of things. It should keep the root ball from not drying out so quickly, but it also keeps them from being quite so top heavy and from blowing over. So I did it to this area right here. I dug them in, and I did it to that one over there. And then this is another type of thing that I would commonly do on my walkabout with my snips, is just snip any outliers.
It's a very common sense approach.
It is, yeah. Is it? And why did that escape me,
I don't know.
Stuart?
It's good.
It's just kind of crazy.
Fall over now, guy. I dare you.
It won't dare now that you've told it not to, Stuart. Okay, something else that you can do with, I would probably use some scissors on this, but this is some kind of stone crop sedum. And if I want to keep this low and keep it bushy, because over time it does start getting a little bit leggy as the season progresses, but I can keep it in this wonderful cushiony form and shape that I love so much just by clipping it. And then all of these that fall will either take root, or I can slough them off the surface and clean this area up. But this will regenerate almost immediately. Now the other thing that I could do, like with this guy right here, if my shears aren't too precious, or if I've got my dandelion digger, then I can dig this up and practically just use my hands, and I could put this in a pot and I could gift this to someone. But first I'll clip it for them. It'd be darling to put these in tiny little pots and use on your Easter table.
Yeah.
So that's something else that I can do. But if I wanted to do this, you're thinking, oh my gosh, does she really go through and use scissors on her entire garden? No, of course I don't, though I sometimes think about it. But that could easily be done with a weed eater. You could just skim off the top, and in short order you would have thickened that up. Something else I'm observing is that this yarrow that has been here for forever, this actually came from my sister's lake house. It's a native, and I am going to separate that and put some of it someplace else or gift some of it. So I'm putting that on my to-do list when I'm doing a work day with a shovel in hand. And then over here, I'm just looking at more stuff. More deadheading. Here's an example here of keeping my tulip stand fresh by just pulling the entire bulb out, and the one next to it too. And that way from the street, all of the bulbs still look fresh. Here's another example of where I didn't get the entire bulb last year, and it just puts out these leaves that don't really contribute much to the landscape. And I just pull those and I will compost them. And then, look here, Stuart, my first columbine. Aren't those dear? Those really are one of my favorite things. And it's blooming purple in the front, and the columbine, man, Stuart, they really liked the cold, dry weather that we had, because the columbine has gone everywhere. All of that back there around the lantern.
Oh yeah, I see it.
That's all columbine.
Kinda
And it's
clover
all in
like.
that purple color. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Is it kind of like clover looking?
It does look like clover. It very much
Big
looks like
clover,
clover.
yeah.
And I love the fact that it's kind of a blue-green, kind of a seafoam green. My friend Roger, that you guys have seen before here on the channel, he uses lots of the foliage. Notice how I said foliage? Foliage in his flower arrangements. So I was thinking about that word foliage and how it's a kind of a regional thing, because my mom from Indiana, she always said foliage. She never said foliage, and lots of people say foliage. But then I thought the other day, well, what was a similar word? And I thought of carriage. Well, do we say carriage?
That's
No,
interesting.
we just say carriage. We don't say carriage. Anyhow, I think that's, yeah. Stuart's just shaking his head like, what goes on in that head of yours? Okay, so over here, look, Stuart, lots and lots of columbine, and there's columbine all through in here that will come up following the tulips, so I am not so destitute once the tulips are gone. And then also here, there's lots of foxglove, and look at all these little foxglove babies. So here's some big foxglove guys right here, and then look at all these little foxglove babies in here. pull out the things that aren't babies. So these will come up. They will grow this year in true biennial fashion. They will put on growth this year and they will bloom next year. And there's all sorts of them over here. So if you've had trouble getting any of your foxglove to germinate, I highly recommend putting them around stepping stones or in gravel. And then Stuart, let's look at just the totality of this and how it still looks so pretty. And all of this, once it's finished blooming, this is emerald blue creeping phlox. Once this is finished, we'll weed eat this down. It'll look bereft for a little while, but then it will all start coming back out. And over here, lots of stuff to see. Again, part of the succession bloom. There is, I've got larkspur coming here, coming up in here. It hopefully will bloom about the same time that we do the foxglove. And I can also see lots of things that have volunteered, been planted by birds that I'm probably going to have to dig out. Some Bradford pear starts, some more privet, things like that. And then Stuart, let's end on this. Because look here, I was really concerned, I talk about spring being late, I was really concerned because these crepe myrtles hadn't started budding out, but finally they did. So this is kind of my admonishment to you guys to maybe be a little patient, unlike what I usually am. And let me come over here. This is one that I transplanted last year, and I thought, oh, it was so dry this winter, I bet this doesn't make it. But look here. It's starting to come out at the base. So it may or may not start to put out new buds coming up the stem, but whether it does or it doesn't, that's okay by me, because I know that the transplant was successful because it's starting to come out at the base. So that's just another thing to look forward to and to look for. And over here, look you guys, there's that Minoan lace, and it will come into bloom about the time that the foxglove and the larkspur starts doing its thing. And I'm happy about that. And one last thing, Stuart, before we lose our audience, because this has been kind of a long one. Had a lot of stuff I wanted to show today.
I'm sure they won't hate it.
Huh?
I said, I'm sure they won't hate it.
Look at how pretty this area looks now because I added some more Obsession Andina on this side.
It does look better.
It does look nice, doesn't it? And this for a while wasn't looking too great, and then I added lots of bags of mulch. And I'm also looking out here because I can see I've got some dandelions starting over here, and I've got some weeding that I need to do once I do a walkabout with my dandelion weeder in hand. Here's an example of one of those obnoxious Bradford pears that has gone to seed. Ooh, that actually pulled out. That is a happy note to end on. So, I hope you enjoyed this Working Wednesday walkabout. I know I did, and I'm hoping that the wind dies down today so that most of these tulips can last and endure until Easter Sunday. So, you guys get out into the garden. Well, if you've held on this long, here's my outfit of the day. I love my new hat, and I've got, unintentionally, I've got kind of a, is it Zorro? I've got kind of a Zorro vibe going on today. That wasn't necessarily intentional. It was just a little bit cooler than I expected. But my hat is a wide brim hat that I got off from a store in Santa Fe, and I had been looking for one. I loved it. It's flat brimmed, and I really like it, and it projects out a little bit more to protect my skin from the sun. One thing I wanted to point out, because so many of you have asked what color of lipstick I wear. Well, my two favorite layering lipsticks right now are both from Wet n Wild. The under layer is Mochalicious, and the top layer is, I believe, Dark Pink Frost. So if you have been wanting to know about my lipstick, That's it. My shawl came from, I can't really remember, it was from a friend of mine who had one of those clothing shops, clothing shop events in her home, and I got it there. I can't remember, but I've had it for years. Here is my new kind of top that I'm infatuated with. I got this off of Amazon because it was very similar to one that I had seen in an expensive boutique, and I thought I'd give it a shot. I got it, I absolutely love it, and I have already ordered another color, and if I like that one too and feel it's really well made, then I'm going to order it in more colors because I love it. It's loose. I love the weight of it. It feels, it doesn't feel cheap at all, and I also love it because it's the perfect kind of top to wear with a half tuck or a full tuck with skirts and things like that in the summer. So it's my new fave thing. I just love it. My earrings I got, I think, from Burlington Coat Factory a number of years ago. My bracelets, okay, I love these, you guys. I also got these in Santa Fe. These are African beads. I got them in a number of different colors at an art fair in Santa Fe. They were just $10 a piece, and I'm going to give you the source right here because I loved this woman, and I told her that I would spread her name. Stuart, can we do kind of a close-up on that? Can you see that? There is the name of the source. And here is all of her contact information. And if you buy something from her, tell her Linda sent you. She was delightful. And like I say, I don't know how many of these bracelets. I just love them. And I got some of them in red tone hues as well. I think they were just $10 a piece. And I bought some extras also to give as gifts. So that is my little shout out small business push for her. My breeches are Land's End that I've had for years, and I frayed at the bottom. And these, I think I got these from Target, these slides. I think I got these from Target, and yes, I do need a pedicure, and I will get one of those pretty soon. Stuart, have I forgotten anything? Okay, there you go. There's my outfit of the day.